This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 52 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we have arguably the face of FS1 joining us, Nick Wright. Nick, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
That's a little too strong of an introduction.
Well,
it's a kind introduction, but it's a little too strong, but I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so that was going to be my first question is, do you consider yourself the face of FS1?
No. Colin. Colin's the face of FS1. Colin, to me, is I understand FS1, it was called Fox Sports 1 at the time, existed before Colin got there, and I'm not trying to be disparaging to Jay and Dan and the shows we had, prior to that, but to me, this iteration of FS1 and FS1 being a real competitor in the daily talk space started with Colin, coming to the network. I think it was Labor Day or the day after Labor Day 2016. In fact, I'm almost certain that's when it was. And to me, in my opinion, he's been the face of the network ever since. Like he gave us a real credibility and validity. And then, and obviously I'm partial because he also, was incredibly influential in me getting opportunities once FS1 hired me. But yeah, I look at Colin as the faces of FS1, if there is such a thing. If you have to have a face of a network, then it's Colin.
Do you strive to be the most valuable personality on the network?
So I don't look at it that way. I've said this, previously over the years, and in fact, I'll give you a little anecdote here, if I may stand up for a moment, because I have it framed on my wall next to me. This is a story from March of 2011 called "What's Wrong with Nick Wright." And so this was written in Kansas City by like our alt weekly there, or one of the alt weeklies. And it's like, I don't know, it's like 10,000 words. And it's called "What's Wrong with Nick Wright" because the premise of the article is kind of that I'm delusional. That I, at the time, was hosting on the number 2 sports radio station in Kansas City, a show that was not winning its own time slot in the ratings against the Heritage Station. And in that article, I laid out kind of my career goals, the last of which is the answer to your question, which I'll explain in a moment. And it kind of, the premise is this guy's out of his mind. Like he's not even winning afternoons in Kansas City yet. And yet he says the final step, step to the mountaintop for him personally is that there will be a moment in time where if you were to ask 100 sports fans in America, Family Feud style, who is the biggest sports talk personality in the country, that I would get the plurality. So that is a professional goal of mine. It is one that I clearly have not reached. I do think, if I may be self-congratulatory, while I think if you were asked right now, if you asked that question, I would get 0 votes out of 100 for who is the biggest. I do think over the last few years, I've gotten to a place where I would get a few votes for who is your favorite or who is the best. I think I would get, if you asked 100 people, I think I would show up on there, somewhere. But so, yeah, I do have a goal to be the number 1 guy in the industry at some point. I don't really, you know what I mean? I don't view it as like, oh, I need to be this within the network. But so I hope that answers your question. I'm long-winded, but that is that quote. If I were to take this out of its frame, I could find a very similar quote to that in there from 13 years ago.
So as we'll say, an important personality on FS1. How
Sure.
are you managing to make it through this week and do something that so many national media members seem to be struggling with, and that is talking about the WNBA?
I don't think it's that hard. So here's the thing. Now, to be fair, to colleagues either at my network or other networks, I think this shocks people when I tell them this, but it's the truth. I don't consume a lot of sports television. I consume a massive amount of live games, and I am almost always listening to some information-based podcast while I'm going about my daily routine. But I don't sit down and watch a lot of shows, and it's kind of twofold. One is I don't really like, and I'm sorry, I'm giving a long preamble, but I'll answer your question. I don't like to watch stuff before I go on the air because it feels like it can kind of pollute your own take, or if somebody says something that you were already thinking, then it's like, oh, did I take their take even though I already had it? So I try not to. Obviously, if you're online, you can't avoid all of it. And then after the show, I'm not going home and watching, the sports talk. I'm spending some time with my daughter and my wife, and then the games start. So I can't speak with great specificity on what everyone has said. But obviously, there have been some people that have stepped in it. Even if you don't consume it every day, it would appear that's happened. So here is my kind of big picture theory on what's going on here. I think you have these disparate factions that typically would not come together in a metaphorical room that have found themselves all in the same room, and they're tearing each other apart. So I think there are folks that don't consume any sports media at all typically that are now seeing, oh, wait, like you're going to take Angel Reese's quote and truncate it at the worst possible time for her. That must be a direct attack on Angel Reese and maybe an attack on Black women specifically. When, in my opinion, in reality, it's like, no, kind of the sports aggregators do everybody across the board. But if you're not familiar with that, it seems pointed and, and specific to that person. So you have those folks who are angry. You have another group of people that I think feel like, rightly or wrongly, the WNBA always should have been getting this coverage. And now it is. And now instead of being happy it's getting the coverage, is almost it. The analogy I keep using is it's like someone who was a fan of Mumford and Sons when they were playing, 80-person bars, and now they're playing arenas, and they almost are like, no, I was here first. You don't know the deep track. And it's like, okay, but I'm here now. So I do think there is an element of that involved here. I also think there is an element of I'll get back to that. And I do think there's an element of folks who are acting as if it is a privilege to have our coverage at all.
Yeah.
And therefore, our coverage cannot be criticized. You're lucky to have me at this party, so don't you dare say, I'm not dressed for the occasion. And I just think it's all insane. I think that there is a very obvious, not that complicated sports story, which is you have this star-laden rookie class with one legitimate superstar. I think Angel's excellent. I think Cameron Brink is excellent. I think they are compelling characters and compelling athletes. Obviously, Caitlin is compelling on a different level and has performed individually on a different level from those two players at the collegiate and professional level. That is not an opinion as much as it is a fact. So I think there is some, internal jealousy amongst the veterans, certainly amongst the rookies, maybe even amongst some of her own teammates. That is not that different from what we saw when LeBron came into the NBA. We've seen this in sports before. What we thought when I forget who it was. I think it was Johnson, I don't want to get the name wrong. The defensive back for the Bears, who said about Caleb, like, hey, that Hollywood shit ain't going to play here. That's not that abnormal in sports. What is, I think, unique to this situation is, and it must be acknowledged, there is not just with Caitlin, but with the WNBA as a whole, a real racial dynamic. And I think you are being naive, if not willfully ignorant, to not acknowledge, as Paige Beckers did. Everyone should go back and look at Paige Beckers' ESPY speech from like 4 years ago, where she says, hey, she doesn't apologize for winning that award. I think she feels like she deserved the award. But she made the point that this is a majority Black woman sport, that a lot of the biggest accolades disproportionately have gone to white women. Now, another deeper level, kind of more complicated discussion is, I don't think a lot of those accolades have been undeserved. Diana Taurasi is probably the greatest women's player of all time. Ionescu's an all-time great. Sue Bird's an all-time great. There are, given the demographics of the league as a whole and the demographics of the 20 greatest players ever, it does skew disproportionately white. Now, why is that? That's a whole nother discussion. So I think all of that has come into play, which has made a lot of people, just impossible to have this conversation without sounding insane. And I've always been super comfortable and super interested in talking about race, which I think maybe allows me to be less nervous acknowledging it as a white guy in this space. I also probably have, had more of at least a casual. I had enough of an interest in the WNBA that last year, one of the biggest sports bets I made all year was before the season, the Aces to win the title, and then a very small sports bet on the Aces to go to undefeated wire to wire. So I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to act like, oh, I've been to this part, but I'm not totally ignorant to the league as a whole prior to Caitlin. So all that's going on. And the last piece of it is this. For the diehards of any sport that are like, we should get more coverage. That isn't the NFL or the NBA, essentially. The thing is this. The coverage is great. But the coverage is, how I feel like I know your sport has made it to the next level? When you are finally a part of the dumb coverage. Out of college basketball. Is this person a villain? If we're only talking about your sport on like the X's and O's level, then it hasn't transcended to where, like, the dumber the conversation gets, the bigger the sport has gotten. And that is what the WNBA is now experiencing. And I think ultimately it's going to be good for the league. I think it's good for sports fans. But right now it does seem like, my goodness, a little messy for folks.
Who has benefited more from the WNBA and current media relationship? The WNBA because national debate shows are talking about them more, or has the media benefited more because the WNBA is now giving them interesting topics to talk about?
Oh, listen, I don't know if it's like, a clear winner and a loser. I think the WNBA is a huge winner in this and deserves to be. And I am interested in how this continues and if it can expand further than just the prism of, Caitlin and Caitlin's relationships and rivalries. Because I happen to believe that the young lady at USC, Juju, has a chance to be better than everybody. Now, I tend to get hyperbolic at times with the better than everybody stuff, so I understand that might feel a tad premature. But better than everybody, I think, is on the board. And if Caitlin, kind of modeled after Steph's game, which is one of the reasons she's so compelling, Juju feels a lot like she's modeled after Kyrie's game. And that is such a captivating style to where Kyrie you know what I mean, even prior to this finals run, already kind of had legendary status based on, you know, his bag and his talent. LeBron just called him the most gifted player ever. So I really hope that the momentum carries over in the WNBA and in college basketball, because Paige is still there. There are still compelling stories, and I think Juju can be a superstar. And see if we can have second and third levels of this wave.
Was there an aspect of race with Chennedy Carter's foul on Caitlin Clark, or was that more of just an easy dot for the media to connect?
Oh, I mean, do I think Chennedy Carter fouled Caitlin Clark because she's a white girl? No, I think that is a wild accusation. I have no reason to believe that. Do I think how it was covered, there was a racial aspect? Obviously. The Chicago Tribune, Chennedy Carter's not hometown, but the Chicago Sky's paper doesn't have an editorial from the editorial board, not from one person, the view of the newspaper, saying that's an assault if it happens outside of a sporting contest, if it's not a black girl fouling a white girl. I don't think that, so I do think there was undoubtedly a racial component to the coverage of it. Again, people have to be comfortable acknowledging that there is a thing I've said for a long time, which is one of my biggest frustrations with people as a whole, is that there is a group of folks that are more bothered by accusations of racism than actual racism. They have more problem with people bringing up race as a factor than they do with actual cut and dry instances of racism. I think those people are abhorrent. And I think that a first cousin of that is people who are allergic to acknowledge. Listen, the way the Iowa women's team versus the LSU women's team was covered for a post-championship game, there was a lot of race involved in that. It's undeniable. You have this overwhelmingly black team that beat an overwhelmingly white team, and the overwhelmingly white team was feted as if they were co-champions. They weren't. They got literally also invited to the White House. I mean, now, was all of that race? No. Was some of it race? Was the fact that they were the villains and they were the dirty debutantes? Was part of that race? Of course. But would Caitlin, and is there an element of Caitlin Clark's is there a percentage of Caitlin Clark's popularity that is because she's white? Sure. Is it the majority? I don't believe so at all. Is it even a large percentage? I don't believe so. But to act like it's 0%, I think is denying kind of realities of America. Also, in a similar way, I think that I don't think it is problematic if, I don't know how to say this right. I'll use I think there was a period of time when there were not many black quarterbacks at all in the league. Now that almost all the best quarterbacks are black. I shouldn't say all, but you know what I mean? A lot of the best quarterbacks are black. But when there weren't many, I don't think it was controversial to say that there were a lot of black Americans that didn't, if their team wasn't in it, you know what I mean? They were Mike Vick or Randall Cunningham fans. Like, hey, that's our guy, right, you know, kind of fighting against the odds. Women's basketball is weird because so many of the best ever are white women, but it is still a majority black sport. So I think there were some casual, if less than casual fans that saw Caitlin Clark and assigned underdog status to her because she was a white girl. Yeah, I think they did. Even though she's not an underdog, and even though she's a shit talker and taunts and does all that same stuff, I think people did it. I don't think it's dangerous or problematic to acknowledge that or to be able to discuss that.
I think if we're acknowledging that some of her popularity has to do with race, and we're acknowledging that some of the coverage around her has to do with race, then it was almost predictable for some of the media to jump to that Chennedy Carter's foul on Caitlin Clark and making that about race as well, just knowing the polarization of it and the engagement that it would get.
Yeah, that, by the way, I'm not, playing ignorant here. I didn't see that. I'm interested in, like, I didn't see someone be like, she fouled her because she's a white girl. I said, I think that there is a real jealousy towards $20 million shoe deal, the coverage, all of this, that maybe race plays a factor in to a degree, but I don't think, I mean, Angel got fouled in a very similar way a couple games before, and some of that is all you hotshot rookies, kind of what Diana was saying before the year even started, like, there's going to be a welcome to the WNBA moment. And one other point on this, James Jones made this point on Colin's show, and I think it's a smart one that I hadn't thought about, which was, he said, folks who don't watch the WNBA prior to this year don't realize that because there is not the raw speed and athleticism and leaping ability that is in the NBA, and the game is played much more ground-based, it's a more physical game. That it is more physical than the NBA due to necessity, because you're not just, the floor is not totally spread and guys aren't jumping over people. I hadn't thought about it like that, but that actually logically tracks, that it would be more physical just because it is less about raw, brilliant athleticism that would lead to a more physical game.
Which should be perfect for the older generations of fans that are longing for 80s NBA basketball.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Are there ever times that you craft a take that you don't really believe in, but you do it knowing that it's going to spark attention?
No.
Always genuine.
No. Yeah, so this is what I say, and people can judge this if they want. I don't really care. It's the truth. Everything I say I believe. Television is a performance.
Sure.
So I am starting from where I believe and then figuring out how to make it pop, either with maybe a slight extra layer of certainty to it. Like, you know what I mean? Like this whole idea of like guaranteeing wins or things like that. Like on its face, everyone knows that's absurd. It's guaranteeing a win is literally saying I can predict the future. No one can do that. So you know what I mean? So I think everyone is in on, it's not actually a guarantee. You're not playing in the game. Even if you were, you couldn't do it. But I don't think that is a sustainable model if you're on TV multiple hours a day, 5 days a week, because you'll get found out. You know what I mean? Like it's the old, sorry, I have a runny nose. It's the old, never tell a lie and you don't have to remember anything. I couldn't do the show, a live improvisation-based television show, if before I said everything, I couldn't just react and say what I thought, because I was like, oh, damn, does this contradict this thing I said before? Like, so no, I don't do that. I do not do that.
Did that ability to sound so certain and be definitive about takes and that confidence come natural to you, or was it learned?
Yeah.
Like, so how did you sound at Syracuse?
Oh, I mean, way, way worse, but the style's always been the same, which is, I have always delivered sports arguments, and this can really irritate people, co-hosts or the audience at times, but it's just the only way I know how to operate, which is from a place of, if after I have made my point, you don't agree, you must be misunderstanding something I said. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's kind of the play. Like, I know from an intellectual standpoint that, of course, there are times I am wrong. But in the midst of saying anything, it doesn't ever seem possible that I'm wrong. Does that, does that, it's kind of like, I'll use the, this is not a great example, but I'll use it. A lot of folks, if you're picking there will be a lot of people that say, I've got the Celtics in 6 games going into these finals because they think, okay, I think the Celtics are going to win and I think it's going to be a good series, not go 7. They'll lose twice. And those same people, before each game, will pick the Celtics. They'll pick the Celtics 6 times in a row, even though they have said going into it, because intellectually they know they're not going to sweep. But before each game, if you think they're the better team, you're like, well, I like them here. You know what I mean? I think they're going to win. Again, like I said, it's not a perfect analogy. I know intellectually that I'm wrong, a good deal of the time. But in the moment, I never think, well, this is one of those times.
Yeah.
If I did, I wouldn't be making the argument. And so that's kind of how I've always operated and it's why I can be an exhausting person on, or as my wife would tell you, off the air to argue with. Like my wife, I don't want to say it has been a problem because we have a great marriage, but it is one of her, biggest frustrations is she'll say to me sometimes mid argument, might be too strong, but marital disagreement, we're not on TV right now. Or she'll say to me, she'll sometimes say, I'm not Broussard. Like, stop trying to win this, little debate. And so, but it's just kind of how my brain has always operated. So how I sounded at Syracuse, awful, I'm sure, but it was the same style, if you will. And it's certainly how I did, local radio for 10 years from that place.
Yeah, you obviously kind of started with back in 2011. You said that how you always wanted to be the biggest and best sports talker, but being that you're from Kansas City, you had that job on local radio talking about your local teams. Did it ever feel like that was going to be satisfying enough for your career? Because that's a gig that a lot of people strive for.
Right. So it might have been the happiest I ever was. Maybe. I don't know. It's certainly up there. So I had a kind of fork in the road life moment, which was, like I said, that article came out in March of 2011. Fast forward a year to March of 2012. And now I've beaten the other station. Our station at 610, which had some legends on it. Yep. Damon Amendolara was on that station. DA, who's one of the best sports talkers in the country. A guy that used to be a great sports writer and a very good sports talker. I don't know what's happened to him. I don't know where he is now, but some of your audience might know who he is. Jason Whitlock. He was on that station. Danny Parkins was on that station, and I'm leaving other people out. Some great personalities were on that station. I was the first one to ever beat 810, and I had become kind of, at 27 years old, the guy in Kansas City. And that's my hometown. That city one day will have a street named after my father. My dad ran the firefighters union there for the better part of 40 years. I just renewed my vows there. The guy who's now the mayor was one of my dear friends from high school, a year older than me. And the reason I mentioned renewed my vows there was because he did the ceremony. Like, I have real roots in Kansas City, and I was like, okay, I can probably do this forever. You know what I mean? Like my wife and I, at the time, fiance, we had gotten engaged and we were looking at houses to buy. And I got the opportunity, or I kind of had pitched myself for an opportunity to do mornings in Houston. And I did not want to go to Houston. I did not want, Texas was not my scene. It was not what I wanted to do. But I knew if I wanted to reach my ultimate career goal, couldn't get there from Kansas City. There had to be a major market step. And I made the choice of, I'm going to chase it. So, like, if I'm being totally vulnerable and honest, who knows if that was the right choice? I don't even know right now. Career-wise, yes. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm not a happy person. I am. But, like, there was an opportunity there to just be like, I'm kind of set.
Yeah, and very comfortable.
And, I'll never make the money one can make at the top of this industry, but you also living in Kansas City, you don't have to make a lot of money to kind of feel very comfortable. And being, it was big fish, small pond thing where there's no, other than the athletes, there's no celebrities in Kansas City. So like the big sports talk guys, as silly as this sounds, are like legitimate local celebrities. And so, I certainly did consider it. And I don't regret at all the path I took, but and so I left in the spring of 2012, and I did not set foot back in Kansas City until the Royals were in the World Series, because I missed it so much. My dad was still there. My wife's sister and her mom were there. My wife and family would go back. I would. Like, I was like, I'm going to miss it. And I didn't love Houston.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The way it's not that I disliked Houston, but Houston never felt like me. And so, that wasn't easy for sure.
And you were looking at Houston as more of a stepping stone at that point anyway.
Yeah. I don't want to be dismissive. One of the greatest people I've ever worked with and one of the greatest men I've ever known, John Lopez, was my co-host in Houston. The people in Houston were great to me, so I don't want to disrespect it. But yes, I didn't take the job in Houston thinking I'm going to retire here. You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't the plan.
So how did you get to FS1 then at that point? Because, I mean, Houston it's a much bigger market than Kansas City, but it's not like, I don't know. It doesn't strike me as a place that has a super passionate sports radio audience. Like,
no, it doesn't.
You're not doing double digits in ratings in Houston.
No. I mean, it's the fourth biggest market in America, but it's not the fourth best sports market.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's kind of directly correlated. The colder your city, the better the sports radio ratings. And you know what I mean? Like Miami, Houston, Dallas is the outlier. Dallas has huge numbers, but LA's, those places. Meanwhile, Philly, Boston, Cleveland, Kansas City, New York, those places do really well. So that it is a long, kind of complicated story. I'll just tell the short version of it. I had done some fill-in stuff on Fox Sports Radio. It was 2016. My wife's from California. I wanted to be she's from Sacramento, but I wanted to be in California. And I went and pitched on my own to the head of ESPN LA and the heads of Fox Sports Radio, which is based in LA, but also has a big flagship in LA. Like, hey, I should have a show. And ESPN Radio, the guy there was super nice. Max Kellerman was nice to me. He was, doing a show there, and I had known him a little bit, but they didn't have any openings. Fox Sports Radio potentially did, but they were getting ready to announce that Colin, Colin hadn't yet come over yet.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do more stuff kind of hand in glove with FS1. And so they were open, I think, to hiring me, but they wanted to see, I think if they hired me, was there a chance my show would get simulcast, because they knew they were about to do a simulcast with Colin. And I ended up meeting with the then head of FS1, Jamie Horowitz, just trying to get him to sign off on Fox Sports Radio hiring me. And, like I said, I'll give the short version of it. The short version of it is at the end of the meeting, he was like, why have you not tried to get me to hire you? I was like, because I don't do TV, I do radio. And he was like, I think you could do TV. And then I met with the guy who's now my boss, Charlie Dixon. He and I bonded over the fact that I had been on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire as a kid and won $50,000. And I ended up auditioning 9 times, flying out to LA, doing a show, going back to Houston. And then around the Super Bowl, so I guess this would be January of 2016, ESPN offered me a job and FS1 offered me a job. And through the great wisdom and advice of my wife, I went with FS1, and it's been, one of the best decisions I ever made.
ESPN's offer was for radio or TV?
ESPN's offer was it initially was an unknown radio show local in Los Angeles with weekly television appearances. Probably my guess is Around the Horns, something like that. They then at the very end told me what the radio show would be in LA, and I don't remember who had it then, so I'm not going to say what time slot, but a major time slot in LA. And it's so funny how life works. I accepted the offer from FS1 on a Tuesday night, and Wednesday morning, sent an email saying, I hadn't signed a contract, sent an email saying deal's done. And Wednesday morning, the ESPN folks called me and were like, hey, we finally have it locked down. We know exactly what show you'd be doing. And because of the show you'd be doing, it's actually a little more money than we thought. And I was, if I'm being totally honest, absolutely crushed, because my whole goal was to get a big time radio show in LA and get on TV a little bit. And I told the guy, and to his credit, he didn't push me on it. And I told him, I was like, listen, I accepted last night. And while I haven't signed anything, I told him yes. And I'm not going, you know what I mean? I'm not going to go back on that. It's not how I do business. And I thought I had made a grievous error. I tell you guys, I cried. I got off the phone and I cried. And I was like, why, just wait to send that email. Like, what'd you do? This was and I was nervous because I hadn't done TV.
Right.
And it's just funny how life works out. 6 months later, the fall of 16, I started April 20th, 2016. 6 months after that, ESPN did a massive round of layoffs. And I'm pretty confident I would have been one of those people. You know what I mean? Just because I had been brand new, whatever. Meanwhile, around that exact same time, FS1 was talking to me about moving to New York to front First Things First with Cris Carter. And you know what I mean? And then the best thing for me. And I like the fact, I really like the fact, this is where, I don't know if ego is the right word, but I think it's really cool that of all the people on or who have been on FS1, the only two that are, basically, FS1 products are me and Joy. You know what I mean? Everyone, the former athletes are in a different category. You know what I mean? Almost like their original employer was the Philadelphia Eagles or whomever. But everyone else kind of came through the pipeline. Like I look at FS1 as the place that took a chance on me, that developed me. And so, and Joy got hired the same week I did. And Joy and I were in a very similar spot, which is she was in from local radio in Miami. I was
Right.
in from local radio in Houston, and both of our families had stayed. You know, my wife and kids were in Houston. I was commuting on the weekends. Joy's family was in Miami. She was commuting when she could. And she and I both were out there like, I guess we're going to try this thing out. And so, and she's one of my favorite people. And so I just think, I mean, that's been a long time. What's that been? 8 years?
Yeah.
8 years. This is the longest I've ever worked anywhere. So yeah, it's great.
So then that was 2016. How long before so you didn't even know you were going to be doing the show in New York when you signed with FS1?
No. I definitely wasn't going to be. I was going to be theoretically on like a sidekick on a show that Colin was maybe going to do.
Okay.
And after the herd. And maybe do fill-in stuff on the herd, guest stuff on other things, but I was, they were building out their roster. That was what I had agreed to. By the time I got out there, that show that Colin was going to do had morphed into a show with that guy I mentioned before. I don't know where he is now, Jason Whitlock. And he and I were not going to work together in any capacity. And so the show that I had theoretically signed up for no longer existed. And so that's where I would have been a man without a country, essentially. But Colin, advocated that I get to fill in for him. And that was, one of the biggest things that ever happened to me in my career. I was filling in for him the day Kevin Durant signed with the Warriors. It broke 3 minutes before the show started. If I remember correctly, ESPN that day was in Wimbledon coverage on both networks. So we were like the place for it. And I'm anchoring that for 3 hours. They hire Skip and Shannon. They have Undisputed. Undisputed's a rocket ship. And now they need a show to give Undisputed a lead in. And so, yeah, I mean, they hire me in April of 16. And by January of 16, maybe December, I'd have to look. Not January of 16, it'd be January 17, but December of 16, they are talking to me about going to New York to do a morning show that we ended up calling First Things First. So yeah, that was not like, this is the plan. It was, right. They were bringing me in, and that's how it worked out. And it's just, good timing, good luck, all those things.
How was working with Cris Carter?
I love CC. I mean, it was great. And it gave, Cris is a legend and one of the greatest football players ever. And a super famous, well-respected broadcaster. And it gave me real credibility. It was a different show, but that was also because I was a different broadcaster. You know what I mean? Like our show, so we had Cris, then Cris left. We had fill-ins for, rotating fill-ins for a while. A guy like Chris Canty did a great job with us regularly. It's another CC, different, it's kind of weird, who is great. And I'm so happy he's getting real shine as he is now. And, from the time post Cris, when you don't immediately hire someone full time, well, then it kind of, I don't want to say becomes my show, but yeah, you know what I mean? Like I'm there. And so it was the different iterations of it. Now, the show we have right now, it's nobody's show. I mean, Kevin Wildes, again, self-appointed leader of the show. We give him credit for that. But it is me, Wildes, and Brew. It's our show. What makes the show work now is the three of us. Yeah. And you know what I mean? All of us together. But yeah, that was great. And I was sad, obviously, when CC left, but things happen.
What was his departure as abrupt for you as it was for everybody who was watching from the outside?
I don't know how it was for other people. It was abrupt.
Yeah.
It was abrupt. But listen, things happen.
Yeah. who is responsible for sort of unearthing Kevin Wildes? Like who saw this longtime producer and writer and said he should be on camera?
Okay, so I think that my former boss Jamie Horowitz and my current boss Charlie Dixon get that credit. And you'd have to ask one of them who in the room, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I have a very funny Kevin Wildes origin story for me that I will tell you real quick. So if I went to LA and met with these people in 2012, I could look it up in my email, but probably 2010, I am doing stuff in Houston. I've filled in for Jim Rome at this point. I have a national weekend radio show, and I'm like, gosh darn it, I want to get on some type around the horn, something from Houston, whatever. And I set up meetings with Eric Rydholm and Jamie Horowitz, who was at the time doing First Take at ESPN. And I fly to New York on my own. And as I land, I get a note or a call that says, Jamie got called to Bristol, can't meet with you. We know you're only here for a day. He wants to set you up to meet with someone he works with. And that person was Kevin Wildes. And I walked in Wildes' office as 25, 26 years old and kind of pitched him on why I should, have a chance to go on First Take or whatever. And Wildes let me do the whole pitch and then was like, all right, so you should know I have nothing to do with that show. And I had never thought a meeting went worse than the one with me and Wildes. I honestly never thought. I had the morning, so I had prepped for a meeting with Jamie. I had now gone there, find out a few hours before I'm meeting with this guy. So I'm like, where do I know that name from? I'm like, oh, Half-Baked Ideas. So I start like on 2x speed, listening to as many Half-Baked Ideas pods as I can. I'm trying to find something. I walk in with some icebreaker about parenting that whatever it was, his response was deadpanned. So that's the icebreaker you planned? Like, oh, Jesus, man. What a disaster. This couldn't be going worse. Then after that, I met with Rydholm, who is a saint and a legend. Was such a cool meeting and was so kind. And I'm like, well, that guy was awesome. This other guy thinks I'm a clown. A year later, I get an email from Wildes saying, hey, I'm thinking about creating a new NBA show on ESPN. I don't really know exactly what it's going to be, but here's the idea behind it. I want you to, if we can get you a studio in Houston, I want you to shoot like a demo for it. And then that show ended up not being specifically created. He ended up creating The Jump instead. With all that said, one of the reasons after that Fox Sports Radio meeting that I told you about, when they were like, hey, we'd have to find out what the new head of FS1 thinks of you. One of the reasons I was able to get that meeting with Jamie was because I called in a favor. I was like, hey, remember 2 years ago when I came to New York and you canceled on me? Like, you've got to take this meeting now. But that was then Wildes. And Wildes was, he was, I think, a strong contender to be on the show when it launched, but ended up doing other things. And then, right before the pandemic is when we added him officially. And, it was, what a weird spot for him, man. He's created TV and he is brilliant.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to pay him too many compliments, but the dude's brilliant. And our first meeting notwithstanding, as likable as any person anyone's ever met. And but he starts, and like 2 weeks after he starts, pandemic. then we're in boxes for 2 years. And so like Brew had been a regular guest on the show and then hired full time and had done the show for months before he and Wilds ever were in the same room together once in their lives. Like, it was a weird spot. And now he is, when I hear people talk like about, what's going to happen inside the NBA, and there's almost even if Ernie doesn't go, they'll be fine. It's like, no, Ernie is a massively important part of that show. I would argue, with no disrespect to Shaq or Kenny, that after Charles, Ernie's the most important part of the show. Someone who does that job perfectly is so hard. Now, there's a few people who I think do it. I think Ernie does it. I think TNT's lucky. I think they got 2 of them, because Lefko is as brilliant of a host as anybody. And Wilds, who's kind of wearing multiple hats, because he's the host, but he's also giving takes and, befooling himself about Mac Jones and things like that. But yeah, it was, it was, I credit Charlie and I credit Jamie for seeing it. And you know what I mean? And believe, because that's a big swing, right? Yeah, you know what I mean?
For sure.
And he's great. He's great. And Brew is the 3 biggest compliments I can give Brew are, first of all, he is the kindest human being I've ever met in my life. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I'm not a religious person. My wife and some of my family are. I'm not anti-religion. I'm just not a religious person.
Yeah.
Brew to me is the best advertisement for religion there is, in that I don't know how he's never in a bad mood, but I assume it has something to do with his, faith or belief system. And he's truly, more so than anyone I've ever met, walks the walk on treat people how you wish to be treated. He is a pleasure to work with. And the other thing is, he's the only person I've ever worked with in any level of my career that sometimes says something that's fact related, not opinion, but fact related. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. You know what I mean? Where he has his level of prep and knowledge. I know that sounds like I'm a compliment to myself, but that's kind of my biggest attribute is I know stuff. And so, and Brew's on it. And so, the 3 of us, I think, have unlocked something pretty cool.
Did you have any interest, or were you approached at all about replacing Shannon Sharpe on Undisputed?
So I'm glad you're asking me that, because that is there are so many people that are certain they know a lot about something they know nothing about, which is this idea that Skip and I have, I was banned after a certain performance. It's just totally made up out of whole cloth. And in fact, that viral clip where it says at the end, some people have seen, some people haven't, Nick Wright's first and last. I was on Undisputed multiple times after that. It's just made up nonsense. It's just not true. And the idea that I want to be very clear, and I don't want to be I trust you, but I don't want to be misaggregated. So I want to be very, very clear with my words here. There is not another show I would rather be doing. And so, and everyone that works with me knows that. So the idea, I'll say it again. There isn't a show that I would look at as a promotion. I am doing the exact show I want to do. So this idea that, that's the next step, that's not how I view it. Now, that is not a knock on anyone or any show. It is just a testament to how I feel about what I'm doing. And so, do I think that if I had gone to the bosses and been like, I want a shot at that job, Do I think I would have gotten a very fair shot at it? Absolutely. I do think that. It never, and people are going to have a hard time believing this, but if they listen to the whole pod, I hope they understand how honest and transparent I'm being. It never crossed my mind. It is, and that is, again, is only because of how happy and satisfied I am with what I'm currently doing. And I don't view, and this is one other thing, and maybe I should, I don't view there to be a hierarchy of time slots.
Yeah.
I don't view like, oh, this time slot is, the A team and this is the B team. I think every I think each time slot is what you make it out to be. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And so I don't think of it as, oh, because of where we're on. Now, listen, if it were in radio, there very clearly is, right? Local radio in particular.
Yeah.
There's the 2 drive times, then there's everything else. But on national television, and so local radio, like overnights is the tough, whatever. Everybody knows that. I don't view national television like that. I just don't. Like, that my show starts at 3 on the East Coast or noon on the West Coast. The whole country can see us. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you asked it because so many people have just wild takes, just totally factually inaccurate takes about that. And I have always had kind of a philosophy of, as soon as you debunk one wrong thing on the internet, if you don't debunk every wrong thing, it's like a tacit, it's like, well, yeah. He said this isn't true, so this one must be. So I have, and it has not been easy, I have always just been like, not, you know what I mean? I'm not tweeting, here's the real story, because that can get you in a bad spot where, unless you're prepared to do it, so another one is like, it doesn't matter. There's some weird stuff about me and Clutch that there's whole YouTube videos about where people don't understand. People are like, Clutch pays and there's these list of people, and I'm on them. And I'm like, actually, guys, just so everyone understands how the agent business works, if we're saying we're represented by Clutch, we actually pay them. It's not they don't pay us. And like, and so there's just, there's a lot of obvious nonsense and misinformation, but it's whack-a-mole. Once you start disputing certain things, you got to dispute everything, and I'm just not in that business.
Yeah, and I think a year ago, Undisputed was kind of viewed as the bigger show. I think the growth that First Things First has had, and the growth that you've had at FS1 has kind of proved, though, that the time slots don't really matter on television.
Well, there's certainly shows that are bigger shows than other shows. Yeah. I just don't think that is based on your time slot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think that there are, for daily sports television, again, that can be different in other industries, so to speak, or in other, but yeah, I just think it's based on.
And I think that combined with the obvious potential LeBron James discourse was like what I think why people.
Well, the LeBron thing is one of the biggest reasons, which, you know what I mean? Which makes sense. I get it. And by the way, I do love to argue. Like, I think I would have really enjoyed doing that.
Yeah.
But I love doing what I'm doing. And so it wasn't, and there's these other factors that people don't even ever think about. Like, let's just say, and then we can move on, that I didn't feel any of the ways I feel about First Things First. There's the factor of my wife owns a women's boutique 10 blocks from our house in Harlem. Like, my daughter goes to school here. Like, there's this whole idea of like, oh yeah, it's very simple. Just go ahead, turn all those. There's just a lot of things about the real human beings involved that are less about, oh, we look at that as the Cadillac, and it's just not how actual things work in my experience.
You made it clear that early on that you never would work with Jason Whitlock at FS1. Did the network ever pitch a show to you with Whitlock? When the Coward show fell through after the Herd, did anyone ever say, "Hey, would you be interested in doing this show with Whitlock?" And like, did you have a conversation with Jason or anything like that?
Oh, no. No. And I don't want to, like I said, I don't know, where he is or what he's doing. So for all I know, I don't want to speak ill of someone who might not be with us. I don't know. So no, I don't, but there was no conversation about that ever. No.
How was the doing First Things First and then evening radio for Mad Dog Radio? What was that?
I mean, it
workload?
was, I slept 12 to 3 twice a day. I slept noon to 3 a.m. and I'm sorry, noon to 3 a.m. Midnight to 3 a.m. and noon to 3. It wasn't sustainable for my life, but it was something I needed to do. And I'm glad I did it. It created a friendship between me and Dan Patrick that wouldn't have existed before, because Dan, to his credit, got my phone number from someone, probably Paulie, because he's the best guest booker that's ever existed, had my number somehow, and reached out to me, cold called me essentially, just to tell me he respected my work ethic. And that turned into a legitimate friendship between us. I got to know Mad Dog, Mad Dog is he just reminds me of so many of like the guys I grew up around, just this old Italian guy that was so clearly, I don't know why, but he was, without saying it, he was clearly worried that I was going to self-destruct. And I don't know why, but every time I would see him, he would like grab me and like put his hand around the back of my head and get real close. He's like, "You're doing great, Nicky." And he would call me Nicky, just like my dad's friends used to. Be like, "You're doing great, Nicky. Don't screw this up. You got to just don't screw it." I mean, it's just such a kind of eccentric and I'm so happy that people that aren't diehard sports radio fans or native New Yorkers are getting to see Mad Dog in his glory.
The quirkiness of Mad
Yes,
Dog.
I mean, because there's whole swaths of the country that just didn't know who he was, even though he's for those of us, I didn't grow up in New York, I grew up in Kansas City, but I'm a sports radio guy. But if you're not a New Yorker or a sports radio nerd, Mike and the Mad Dog doesn't mean much to you. But Mad Dog is so I'm so glad I did it. But I couldn't keep, you know what I mean? That if it were a different time slot, I could have kept doing it. But I had to be at work. I had to be in person in Midtown Manhattan every day by 4:15 a.m. To do that and then do 6 to 8 p.m. on the radio, even though they let me do it from my house, credit to those guys. It was, and my wife hated it. And it was, it was tough. But I'm glad I did it. And it was at a time in my life where, and this is what I said, because Dan, when Dan and I talked or whatever, he talked about doing split shift and all the work and the time missed with the family, and was kind of counseling me to not overwork myself. And I'm like, yeah, but you did. And Scott did. And Colin did. And Steve, all the guys who have done it, did it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like and so, Stephen A. to this day is, what is he producing? 4 hours of content every day on average? And so there is the timing of it and now I do the podcast and the time works better. I do the podcast, then I go to the TV show. But the early morning show and then the evening radio show, which, by the way, Brew is still doing The Odd Couple.
Right.
And Brew, when he first started, when we were doing mornings, and then his show was 7 to 10, that's brutal. It's more doable now because of when our show is still long days. And it's a lot of talking.
Was there ever a possibility of you changing shifts, like going to, because I think you, right after you left is when they added McAfee to middays? Was that?
Yeah, I guess there was Yeah, I mean, theoretically, sure. But it didn't, you know what I mean? Didn't happen. And and that's still, if I were them and it's like, hey, I don't know what the whole math of it was, but I also knew that at the time I was going to be probably launching some form of a podcast, either
Yeah.
the one I do now or something else. And so I wasn't going to be able to do all three. And so the midday show was never available to me. And so, yeah, but it ended up working out great because the lift of the podcast is just so different than doing something 3 days a week or 2 days a week is so different than every day.
Yeah.
Because it does feel like you have these breaths.
Is the ability to discuss topics that mix sports and politics or sports and social issues, is that a skill? Because like not every sports host is comfortable doing that.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, if you're saying I can do it, thanks. But yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a skill. I think that, so I tell my youngest daughter's 10. And no, wait. Yeah, she's 10. Sorry. Did she just turn 11? No, she's 10. And she comes home from school and she is dead set she's going to be an actress. And she's a great student. But there's a certain class where she is, even at 10 years old, she's just convinced. She's like, I don't need this. For what I'm going to do, why would I need this? Which is like, kind of cliche kid stuff. And what I always tell her is, listen, you might not need the college level versions of it, but at your age, you're just getting an information base. I say that to say this, like, I think part of the skill is just having a baseline knowledge of the world. You know what I mean? Everyone needs to know some level of history. Very few people do. And being aware of things and why and how, and being able to just dig one layer deeper than what you scroll past on your social media feeds. And then there is to, have the courage of your convictions, actually have something to say, and pick your spots enough to where you're only talking about stuff you actually really care about or feel deeply about, or something that is such a massive story you have no choice to. But yeah, it's definitely a skill, and it's not for everybody.
Yeah, I do think there's value in it, because like cable news hosts, they're talking to largely audiences and people who share their opinion. I think a sports host has an audience that is probably more politically diverse.
Yeah.
So like you making a political or a social point or connection to a sports thing, like it might actually have more of an impact, than
yes,
cable news.
Well, that's nice of you. I think you're certainly fishing in a different pond. What I will say is this, and I have said this for years, I seem to be losing this battle, but I strongly believe it. I do not believe talking about race is talking about politics.
Yeah.
And I find I'm not easily offended, but I find it offensive for everyone that talking race is considered talking politics, because the implication there is if you advocate for some level of racial justice, that is political, then the clear implication there is that whatever political side they perceive that to be, the other side is anti-racial justice, which if I were on the other side, I'd be like, that's bullshit. I agree with the racial justice stuff. I just disagree on taxes or whatever. And so I don't view, I know the world does. I personally don't view talking about race to be talking about politics. Now, there are times where I will directly talk about political issues. I will talk about guns.
Yeah.
And that is a political issue. I don't talk about abortion. With that said, when Butker says the things that he says, I do in that moment, because there is a direct line. Guns don't, on the podcast at least, guns don't have to, there doesn't have to be a sports connection for me. There's just a human connection for me as a parent. And so, yeah, so I know is political. I wish the race stuff wasn't viewed as political, but it is.
Yeah.
It bothers me, but whatever.
I also think that people have more trust in sports media than news media. So I think, talking about those, a sports.
Oh, that's interesting.
A sports host talking about those things, it could also resonate a little bit more. Would you, if the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, would you take the show back to Kansas City for the parade?
Definitely.
Next year?
Yeah, I mean, that's not my call, but if you're asking
your comfort level.
Would I not because of the shooting? No. That was terrifying in the moment, because you did hear gunshots, and when you hear active shooter, you think of someone indiscriminately trying to, spray the crowd. It ended up, Kansas City has an awful gun violence problem, has my entire life. Amazingly and, unfathomably, it was an impromptu altercation between two individuals or multiple individuals, all of whom were heavily armed.
Yeah.
Which is, so it doesn't make it less tragic or whatever, but like in I'm answering it that way to say, if what had happened there was, a lone wolf on the hill trying to spray maybe I'd feel differently, because that's not what it was. That was at Union Station. My wife and I renewed our vows, essentially got married at Union Station 2 months ago. So yeah, so I've already been back there in a big crowd of people. So yeah, we definitely go back. And I don't like that you said if they win the Super Bowl. when they win the Super Bowl. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's I don't have the same confidence level that you do when talking about sports arguments. I know you've mentioned that you make sports bets. I know you play poker. Have you also? I think you had commented that you feel like, not that you're a gambling addict, but you have like addictive tendencies, or
yeah. No, so I'm definitely not a gambling addict. I think I was probably en route to being one at one point in my life. But that wasn't sports betting.
Balance that? Like, how do you?
Oh, I mean, that to me feels like listen, I haven't studied enough about addiction and the differences of addictions or whatever. So I don't want to, I'm going to on the front end say there might be folks listening that are like, this is not how it is for people. Like I'm talking about for me personally. Okay. I had been a card player since I was a little kid, legitimately since I was a little kid. On both sides of my family, gambling is in my blood and a part of, who different members of my family have been. So I got it honestly. I went to college at a place in Syracuse. We're 40 minutes away. There was an 18 and over casino called Turning Stone. Like I said, right after college, I won 50 grand on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And I was gambling. I was playing. My routine was I'd finish the radio show, go to the casino, play poker. And if I lost at poker, I'd try to get it back at blackjack, which is a terrible way to do things. And I was clearly spiraling negatively. But basically what I did was get in the relationship I'm in right now and have real accountability and responsibility for my wife and for our kids. Yep. And, in my right as it was happening, and I realized how, the spot I was in, I just gave it is embarrassing. Again, I'm telling you a lot of things I don't know if I've ever talked about, I haven't talked about in years. I was 24 years old, gave my mom my banking login info and just asked her I was like, because I knew nobody was more crushed or worried about my gambling than my mom. And nobody ever is I know everybody thinks this about their mom, but I've got the best mom. You know what I mean? And so So I knew how devastated she would be if I was, gambling at that level. So I was like, check my bank account once a week. And she didn't even, she's like, I don't want to. I'm like, it will help me. Like I might do things that I know are bad for me, but I don't want to do things that'll devastate you. You know what I mean? And so she did that. And then at some point, my wife and I, are engaged or, sharing accounts or whatever. And so I kind of had these built-in guardrails for long enough that now I don't, I do have an addictive personality, but that manifests itself in anything. Like I can get on a kick of reading history books where I will like compulsively read 3 in a week. That 2 days ago, my daughter and I started a 700-piece puzzle, and she and I did the border, and then she went to school. And by the time she got back, she was like, Daddy, you almost finished them. I was like, I couldn't stop. And so like, I am aware that is kind of how I I don't do things in moderation very well. But yeah, I have, wherever I was headed gambling wise, I got off that path. And listen, I love playing poker. And one day I'll be retired from media. And in retirement, I'll travel the poker tour, like internationally, to play and to see places. Like that is on my plan of things. But I don't view it for me personally as a problem. I'm empathetic and I understand how it can be a problem and how easily it can be a problem for people, for sure.
Yeah, no, and I don't know about addiction either. I just so that's why I was curious how you were you felt you were able to balance that if you thought you had those tendencies. I think the last thing, were you ever concerned all those years of shaving your head that it wasn't going to grow back?
No, so it's that's another. You've asked some great questions. So I was never worried it wasn't going to grow back because it was so clear where my hair was, and I didn't shave it. I didn't bick my head ever.
Right.
I bicked my head once in high school as like a stupid high school basketball solidarity thing where we all shaved our heads and looked like total idiots. But aside from that, it was a hairstyle. It was a skin fade. It was, it was a very common hairstyle, certainly amongst black guys and amongst, you know what I mean? I remember there was the article, I forget what paper it was in, but where they called it the Travis Kelce, but it's like, no, it's just, and Travis's hair was longer on top than mine. So no, I never thought I was bald or going bald. I just, from the time I was 14 years old, had always gone to black barber shops and gotten a skin fade forever. And so it was just all I ever did. And there is not many things on the internet that bothers me, but this belief that my hair is fake or I got some procedure done. Some people like believe it, not talking shit, but earnestly. Like will send me a DM like, hey man, I'm really curious where you went, how you did it. I'm like, I just stopped cutting my hair. And by the way, I might shave it back. This has gone on long enough. And I clearly don't know how to do it. I don't have a style. People are like, what's the goal? I'm like, there's no goal. So yeah, it is irritating when people think, because the other implication there is your previous look was so bad, you only would have had it out of necessity, as opposed to that's just what I wanted to look like. And so I keep trying to get Wilds and Brew to do a shave your head bet, but none of them, and they have properly sniffed it out, which is because for me it's a free roll because I kind of want to shave my head again anyway. But part of the reason I haven't is I really think it would irritate Fox because they keep having to do new like headshots and show shots.
Right.
Because my hair, I went from shaved head to like, kind of what I would call normal length hair, to then I didn't cut my hair for like a year and it was like down to my shoulders. Then I cut it to this. So they keep having to be like, all right, guys, we got to do shots again because Nick's stupid hair. And if I shave my head, I think they'll be annoyed, but I might do it. I don't know.
All right. So you have the national show that you love. You have the podcast. You have the hair. What's your career goal right now? Are you interested in? Do you have business aspirations? Like, do you look at what Colin has done with the volume? Is that something that's appealing? Or
I don't think I'm a businessman. I don't think that. I do. Listen, I wasn't joking about the poker.
Yeah.
And I do want to be more and more involved from a broadcasting perspective, but also a playing perspective of playing poker at the highest levels. That's really my only non-sports media related career aspiration. As far as, listen, there's an element of, I want to be able to do what Colin did for me for others. And so do I think about, could I expand what's right, and bring people kind of under my umbrella? Yeah, I think about that, and what that means, I don't know. Like and do I think that my podcast / YouTube show could be bigger than it is right now? Sure. And it will be at some point, but that hasn't really been my area of direct focus. But people ask me in the short term, what I want to do is to just keep doing First Things First for as long as I can. It's been on the air for 7.5 years. Like, it's a hell of a run.
Yeah.
Well, that's wrong. I'm sorry. It's been on the air for it started Labor Day 2017. So it's been on the air for, we just had our, whatever, it was 6.5 years, I guess. And it's doing as well as it's ever done. And so and I love doing it. So there's not like a what's next. It's maintain and then grow the pod and YouTube show, and then also become more of a fixture in the poker world. My wife wants to eventually open a second store up. So, help her with that. She might want to open a second store in Las Vegas, which could, be good for my poker stuff. But my long-term goal, I said it to you at the beginning of this, to one day be the biggest guy. But, I'm 39. I get that's not, that I've got time.
A lot of time left.
Yeah. You hope.
Good stuff. Nick, you were great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thanks for being accommodating. I know I'm not a good emailer or responder, so I appreciate your grace there. And yeah, you asked great questions. This was fun.
Thanks.
See you later.
That is Nick Wright. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.